allowing consumers to change doesn't mean they will change. They just like having the choice. And so I think one of the big learnings here is structurally embracing flexibility as opposed to long-term contracts. All right. So businesses, the auto industry has been built off, essentially, and it's very understandably so because we're talking about very large assets that averaging $30,000 to $50,000 a piece. Because what we actually see is that once consumers have a vehicle out on the road, they generally speaking do keep it, but it's very important that they don't have to.
Michael, thanks for coming onto the podcast to chat with me today.
No problem at all, Emily. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I was hoping you might be able to give a little bit of an intro to yourself. So, introduce your name, your role, where you work, but also something that you are passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name's Michael Higgins. I'm CEO and co-founder of a software as a service firm called Loopit Mobility. We provide software in the mobility space to car manufacturers, dealers, rental car firms, to help manage their fleets and the flexible consumer and business offerings. And something I am passionate about. Originally, it was just very much a boy just loving cars, so very passionate about cars. But that has, and being in the auto industry as well, it was a really exciting thing for me to enter when I was a bit younger. But that's really developed over time to not just vehicles, but how we access vehicles, how we use vehicles, and the technology change accordingly.
You've kind of mentioned a couple of these topics that are coming up in the next question already. So,
Mm.
how do you see the relationship between car ownership, leasing, and rental shifting over the next decade? Because there's been quite a big upheaval. I'm gonna pick that word in like the car space in general, let alone like ownership versus EVs and all the other stuff that's happening.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I view it as we're going to see a lot more blurred lines over the coming decade. So, in my view, historically, if you look at it for the first, I don't know, 70 years of cars, it was just purchasing a vehicle. Then financing started becoming more popular. Let's say we enter the 80s, we start seeing leasing, and so, but they're quite rigid and they're quite separate. So you go to a dealership when you're buying a car. Leasing is often done through leasing companies. If you want to rent a car, there's a rental car company. Now, in my view, we're going to see, and we're starting to see, this to really start to blur. So, to not have these rigid definitions where you're locked in from day one into 5 years, right? If you want to finance a vehicle, I think we're going to see a lot more access and usership of vehicles over necessarily traditional ownership. So, in my view, we'll see firms offering daily rental of the same company with the same fleet can run a subscription offering where a car's out for say 6 months, or they can offer a lease which is out for a few years, and so it just gives the consumer the ability to chop and change accordingly.
Might be a bit of a left field question. I was thinking about it yesterday, with all of the stuff happening with New York and their congestion pricing. Do you
Mm.
how do you see, policies around road pricing or, like, congestion or time of use, all of those kind of road pricing policies affecting maybe people's choices in terms of whether they own a car, whether they lease or rental shift? There's no, like, easy answer.
Oh gosh, that's a really hard one. It's quite interesting. So I think I have recently, about a year and a half ago, I moved to the US. We saw like you're talking about congestion pricing, and I can see that it's probably a much more extreme version of that than what we would normally see in Australia. So in Australia, you might have, I don't know, you go on the Harbour Bridge in normal times and it's $3, and then if you're really unlucky going at the wrong time, you might get it at $4. But we're seeing, I would say the dynamic pricing is much more extreme in what I've seen in the US here. So my local tollways will be priced at say 75 cents sometimes, and then other times it might be $17.
That's rough.
Right. Yeah, it's quite dramatic, right? So I think I think this it's almost like an Uberification with dynamic pricing of this space. I think it's kind of I'm not sure where it'll end up, if I'm being frank with you. But I think it's kind of a very interesting looking at different extremes of what some markets might accept and not accept.
With the I like the Uberification, by the way, the whole, like, dynamic pricing. The,
Yes.
what is it's not just dynamic pricing, there's, what is the word for it? It's like spike pricing, peak
Oh,
pricing,
surge
surge
pricing.
pricing.
Yes.
That's yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
dynamic pricing is a really nice word. It's a businessy word for both because I wouldn't call it a consumer word that people really enjoy too much.
That's true.
I think that yeah, I think surge is much more relevant if you got your phone up and you're about to get an Uber.
The fact you're in the US also probably gives you a good perspective on this next question, which is around, like, economic uncertainty.
Mm.
How do you
Yeah.
think maybe, periods of uncertainty can affect consumer behavior about, like, how they decide to get from A to B with their vehicles? How do you think
Yeah, yeah.
not mobility drivers, mobility providers can, maybe adjust their strategies?
But I view it as opportunity, right? If you're a consumer, you have uncertainty, you're concerned about potentially losing your jobs, or we have higher interest rates now, say the US and Australia. Let's say you're looking at between 6 and 8% on a house, and much higher. Sorry, not a bit higher on a car. It allows people to view it slightly differently, right? So if you're going to go, gosh, I don't think these interest rates are going to last, or I'm worried about my job, maybe you don't sign a 5-year lease. Maybe you don't sign a 5 or 7 year finance contract on a vehicle. I will say in these times of uncertainty, we see demand for flexibility. Because if you believe that times will get better and the interest rates will lower, then you don't feel the need to lock yourself into a 5 or 7 year contract. Why don't you just do a 3 month or 6 month or something like even shorter a lot of the time, so you can see what makes sense for you and then write it out, right? And so we're seeing a significant increase for flexibility requirements from a consumer, but also in the business sector too.
I do feel a lot in the car industry now in particular that cars are kind of becoming defined by their software rather than their hardware, and there
Mm.
is now a bigger role for software to play or firmware to play in a lot of vehicles. How do you envision software innovations reshaping not just vehicles, but maybe the entire vehicle access and management ecosystem?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be very significant. I'll probably go back a little bit to what spoke about earlier. I look at a lot of these in distribution structures, how people get cars, how people finance cars, lease cars, however essentially they have access to those assets and how they access those vehicles. Now, my view is, and to be fair as well, this is a lot of what we do at Loopit. It's about helping and seeing companies diversify. So let's say you have one fleet. Let's say you're a company with 1,000 cars or 10,000 cars. Historically, all 10,000 of those cars will be all leased under a 5-year contract. Now I see the structures changing, and we're starting to see a lot of that where they might have 10,000 cars out, and of those 10,000 cars, you have 800 of them are on daily car sharing, right? That allows consumers who are in a city to have a vehicle, just to go to Woolworths or Walmart, depending on who's listening here. Um, so they can get a vehicle, so they can get access to a car. But then maybe 2,000 of those cars are daily or weekly rental, 3,000 are subscription for a couple of months, and the rest are leasing, right? Um, and historically, technology hasn't allowed for companies to run these, I call it multimodal offerings, right? And so if one company can run all these offerings all at once, it allows consumers to have choice, but not necessarily have to sign up 7 different companies to do so. They can do one company can have a whole bunch of different products, and they can upgrade and downgrade and change and chop as they need. See, from a consumer point of view, there's huge value to that, and from a business point of view, there's the value to that because you're really you're making a higher value market for your clients, and so they're staying longer, you're reducing churn and everything like that.
There's a bit of a theme, in a lot of these questions, I feel, around flexibility, uh,
Mm,
not just for consumers, but also probably for the people that provide these services, which is quite interesting. So, on flexibility, do you think
mhm.
that having flexible access models like subscription or leasing would be able to accelerate maybe, say, the uptake of electric vehicles or PHEVs or all of those kind of new hybrid vehicles compared to maybe traditional ownership of
Yeah.
petrol powered cars?
I find this topic real. I'm very passionate about this specific area because I find it very interesting. What we're seeing here is that we're seeing this parallel between the rise of EVs and the rise of flexibility or flexible usership options, call it subscription, micro leases, we can call it long-term rental. We can really call them whatever we like. And why we're seeing this in our view is because it allows for this toe in the water approach, right? So uh, if you look at the technology adoption curve, you've got the innovators, early adopters, early majority, and then late majority, and then finally we have laggards, right? Now, in my view, what we're seeing here is we've gone past the early adopters with EVs, and we're in that early majority stage, right? Now, the early adopters, they're kind of easier and they're harder because um, they're they're harder in that you have to show them something exciting, right? But they're easier because they just don't necessarily they will forgive a lot of things, right? Because they just care about having something that's late and great, right? And so they perhaps won't have as many concerns about what could be seen as potential pitfalls, sorry, of EVs because they want the latest Tesla and they'll just go for it, right? Now, the early majority, it's much more exciting market because it's enormous, right? But they're harder consumers. They have a lot of concerns, right? They have a higher bar for what they view as acceptable. So they have these concerns. What's the residual value on my vehicle? What's an EV actually going to be worth in 5 years? Do I have to replace the battery? Is that going to cost me $20,000? If I wanted to do a family trip from Sydney to Gold Coast, do I have to plan out where I'm going to supercharge? And are there actually going to be enough superchargers on a long weekend anyway? Right, so there's all these kind of questions. Now they might be fair, they might not be fair. You can you decide for yourself whether you think that's reasonable. But what subscription allows here, it allows them to say, look, if I just don't like it, I'll get rid of it. I'm not locked into these long periods, no issue.
It almost sounds like for that more resistant group, it de-risks it.
I think that's very reasonable. I think that's a really good word, de-risking it.
So obviously subscriptions are not a new thing that have been invented
Mm.
for just car leasing and car ownership. They've existed for a while in other spaces. What lessons can the automotive industry on a whole learn from other sectors that have already kind of further on their journey to embrace subscriptions and
Yeah.
more flexible models of access?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like that one. My mind goes to an easy default, which is the streaming services, right? They're the ones we can all relate to. And I think a real learning for these has been allowing consumers to change doesn't mean they will change. They just like having the choice. Right, everyone likes that they can cancel Netflix. How many people actually cancel Netflix? I'm not so sure. I mean, or maybe they'll chop and change to a Paramount or one of the others, but often they'll kind of come back after a period of time. And so the churn on those consumers, if they do move, isn't as finite, right? Um, and so I think one of the big learnings here is structurally embracing flexibility as opposed to long-term contracts. All right, so businesses, the auto industry has been built off, essentially, and it's very understandably so because we're talking about very large assets that averaging 30 to $50,000 a piece. You don't want a whole bunch of vehicles coming back all at once or anything like that, right? And so the whole business industry is built on much longer contracts, 5-year finance, um, full ownership, right? Um, and what we see is, especially of our clients who are entering this space for the first time, their mindset is still that way. It's kind of like, how do I sign up clients longer? Like, how do I really lock them in? And you have to kind of say, look, if you're locking them in, we're probably defeating the purpose here a little bit, right? Because what we actually see is that once consumers have a vehicle out on the road, they generally speaking do keep it, but it's very important that they don't have to. So quite an interesting one across our client network. So our clients are those who run fleets like these. I would say the average lock-in period is about 45 days, but the average time a consumer actually keeps the car is 306 days and increasing. It allows these companies to do numbers on averages as opposed to having to look at it from the point of view of what could they do? What could they get out of, right? And so we look at these averages and we just look at it as a holistic number. But if we give the consumers the ability to change and we just trust that we have a good product that makes them want to stay with us, right? I think there's huge value to that.
Michael, thank you so much for coming onto podcast to chat with me today.
Thank you very much, Emily. I really appreciate it.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Bite Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.